the Joshua Morales Podcast.
Just for a little bit of context, tell me your name and how did you get into what you're doing now?
Sure. My name is Claire Shea. I'm a student at UGRGV and currently an undergraduate research assistant in the Adversities in Childhood and Trauma Lab under Dr. Charak. And how did I get here? Well, I started university as a freshman, and since I'm majoring in psychology and interested in pursuing research in the future, I thought to try to get into any of the research labs at the university, and 3 years later, I'm here.
How do you like it?
I love it. I love research, yeah.
So what's your background? Where did you grow up, and what led you here to the RGV?
Yeah, I grew up, well, that's a tricky question, but I grew up here and there. I grew up in Irvine, California, and then I moved to Vancouver, Canada, then to Taiwan, and I came here when my mom was divorced. We came here because my uncle lived here, and I consider myself a Valley native. I really identify with the culture. I love this place.
What do you love about it so much?
Well, the food is the best.
Yeah.
The food is just the absolute best. But I don't know, everyone here is so warm. You know, every place that I've lived before has been a big city. And being here, everybody, even strangers, you know, they'll just start up a conversation while you're in the grocery shopping line. Like it's very warm here. So
that's awesome.
What I love, yeah.
So I want to touch on your what you're really good at, what you've been doing research for years, right? So one of the things that I'm super interested in is child abuse,
right,
and where it leads in the future. Mm-hmm. One of my clients, they're the Children's Advocacy Center of Hidalgo County. Oh. And last year we were doing the marketing and advertising through Facebook and Instagram, right, and they saw the highest jump in cases in July. Wow. So ever before, right? So anything up to that point, we pushed out on social media. We're telling stories. We're telling what's really going on. We're trying to make it less taboo to talk about. Right. Because, you know, obviously there's certain things that you just don't talk about, especially in our culture, because we're very machismo. Right. We're very prideful, right? So we don't talk about these things. But I noticed that when I had Dr. Chirac on, I got a lot of messages after that saying that you need to talk about this more. You need to make this less taboo to talk about. And these are from my friends that you wouldn't think twice, right? You just go through life and nobody really knows about these things, right? It's something you throw under the rug, you dust under the rug, right? So I'm interested in hearing about your research because you've been researching for the past 3 years, right? Right. So tell me, what's the most insightful thing that you've seen so far from your studies?
So I would say the most insightful thing I've seen from my studies here, specifically in the RGV sample, is the prevalence of polyvictimization. So I guess to kind of back it up and explain what that is, yes. Polyvictimization is basically experiencing 15 or more adverse events, which means 15 or more negative experiences that you've had in your lifetime. And that could be defined as anything drastic like rape or warfare, to even witnessing robbery, things like that. It's like a huge list of experiences that you can have. And here in just a sample from 18 to 29-year-olds at attending a Southern Texas university, out of that age group and out of 467 people, 10% have experienced this, which is you might think like, oh, it's only 10%, but that's actually a very significant outcome. That's, I would say not like on par, but it's pretty close to being of that in a veteran sample or someone from like a very, like a dangerous area. Okay. 10.1%, I believe, and that's pretty significant.
That's interesting. Talk about how you poll these people, because sure. I think that's one of the important parts where you're just not going out to certain places. You're right. doing this through a certain way. So touch right. on that.
So with this sample that we have, we do it through survey format. So sorry. So there's the system called SONA, and we create a survey. We launch it on SONA, and I believe every university student at UTRGV has access to that through their UTRGV login. And most students, I guess, are familiar with SONA at one point or another in their college career. Most people, for example, if you're taking a basic psychology course, you're required to go on SONA and complete a certain number of hours, and that's basically how we get our data set.
Interesting. So how many people have to be in that data set to make it legitimate?
For a data set, typically you need about 150 to, I would say a better sample would be about 200 people.
And that's usually the standard?
That's usually the standard, but it also depends on like what kind of group you're studying. So if you're, for example, if you're studying like a more vulnerable population or a specific population like a Hispanic sample, a lesbian, gay, and bisexual sample, or even the age group, that can totally vary how much is considered legitimate.
Interesting. So we were talking about colonias earlier,
right,
and I found that interesting. So touch on that, because I have a follow-up question what we were talking about. So
sure. So I'm not directly involved in the colonia study under Dr. Chadak, but I hear about it since I'm in the lab. So in the colonias, it's a completely different format for testing, I suppose you could say. It's still a survey form, but they go over to the colonias. It's like an area where it's very low poverty. Usually these individuals are not documented, which, there's a lot of food scarcity. There's just, I've seen pictures from there. It's like not even paved roads. It's like sometimes the houses, the shelters are just made out of like sheet metal. It's like very low income in the area. So the colonias, that's like a very special sample because not everywhere in the world has colonias. Like it's mainly specific to this region. So over there we go physically in person. We take our surveys and they complete it in person. We do family surveys. So we have the kids do a survey, then we do the parent survey and things like that. So yeah, that's how it's going.
That's interesting because for a college of students to actually go to a colonia where there's undocumented citizens, stuff like that, you would feel like it's a very a weird place, a dangerous place maybe to be. So I find that your courage to actually go out there and take these surveys is commendable. How do those surveys look? Like you're asking the families, you're asking the people, the kids. How do those look? How do those questions look?
Yeah, so it's actually, well, you mentioned that it's like courageous for us to go. I actually wouldn't say that it's that courageous for us to go. I think a lot of the times they're more scared than we are. A lot of people won't even open their doors for us because they think we're immigration, we're ICE. So it's like a really terrifying situation for them to be in. But when we go there, we try to have some incentive because of the IRB, which is like the institution that kind of allows what we can and cannot do in our research to kind of keep it safe for everyone. We can't give any monetary donations. So we bring food, we offer them food, and we're like, here, if you can do the survey, we can offer you like these beans, these cans of beans or Rice Krispie treats. We have all kinds of like non-perishable stuff. But basically the survey, it's like sheets of paper. We have them kept inside folders and we give it to them. Usually it's the parents get a survey, the kids get a survey, and it asks all kinds of questions. It asks like, what's your income status? Like what language do you prefer? We translated the surveys from English to Spanish and from Spanish back to English so that it's as clear as possible and as accurate as possible. And for the Colonia study, we're also looking at child abuse. So a lot of the times we don't really think about a situation like that because it's already like there's a lot of factors in that area. There's like a low income situation. It's a lot of stuff. And a lot of people are afraid to report things. They can't report them because how are you going to report something to the police if you yourself are undocumented? Do you know what I mean? So in the surveys, it's completely anonymous. Even if there's something going on, we cannot say anything about it. That's like just our data set. So we'll ask things about, have you ever been slapped by your parent, or have you ever witnessed domestic violence, things like that. So we'll have a lot of questions.
So I'm assuming there are actual cases that has happened.
Right.
So how long has the study been going? Have you seen the correlation between, obviously, when they're young, when they transition into teens to adults, or is it the research too short right now?
So the research is currently too short because there's a huge process we have to go through. Because these people it's a vulnerable population. There's a lot of, not laws, but there's a lot of regulations to go through in order to get to them. Even before we can go to them, we have to go through someone like a caseworker, a social worker who knows the people and will take us to them. And that in and of itself sometimes takes months.
Wow.
And when you go there, again, like I said, people are so afraid. They often don't even want to open the door for you. So when we go there, sometimes we get one family for the course of the whole day, and that's like 4 people. So it's been going on, I think, for a year and a half. And currently, I think we're not even up to the quota of how many families we want to.
How do you think that you all can bypass some of these procedures and stuff that you can actually get out there?
It's really hard to bypass a procedure like that is there to protect people, especially in this political climate. These individuals have to be protected. The area you cannot let the area be known where they're living. And you have to go through a specific person in order to get to them. And that person drives you there, and you get down and you do whatever you need to do. So there's really no way to bypass that without putting people in danger. So it's just more like waiting it out.
Right.
And slowly but
it's
surely.
a long game.
Yeah.
So I find that interesting because before I started getting into digital marketing, I was working in Mercedes.
Right. And
a lot of different regions, like for Alamo, Mercedes, La Feria, La Jolla, there's different groups within. Okay, so the Mexican culture, right?
Right.
There's different Mexicans around the valley, right? So we find that obviously from one colonia, from one group area, they're completely different than that next group, then that next group, then the next group. How does your research take that into account, or does it?
Well, we usually ask pretty specific questions. They're kind of specific but vague. So they're specific in that it's about a specific situation you've been in, but it's vague in that it can mean anything that you want it to be. So for example, if a question is asking, have you ever witnessed domestic violence? The question won't be just, have you ever witnessed domestic violence? It'll be, have you ever specifically seen, I don't know, like your mom being slapped or something like that. And then the next question will be your mom being punched. Like there's very specific wording. So that's how we try to make sure that even though the groups are very different, that we get a similar or a more accurate reading across the board. Okay,
interesting.
Yeah.
So I was reading some of your research, and one of the things you're really good at is stressors prevalent in people of color.
Right.
So talk to me about that, because I kind of want to have this conversation.
Yeah. So, in research, in media, there's not a lot of exposure or not a lot of, in my field, research done with people of color. So there's a lot, even if you search up, for example, like polyvictimization and how it goes into alcohol use, for example, a lot of the population will be like a white population from America. So there's not a lot of research done with, for example, the Hispanic population. Like when I was doing when I was doing like a literature review, which is basically reading up on what studies have been done. I can't remember exactly what I searched up, but it had something to do with Hispanics specifically. And out of the entire portal, only 7 results came up. And
Really?
that's and that just shows you how little research is done with specifically people of color. So.
And that's pretty interesting because I believe now, like Hispanics and blacks, we're the majority now,
right,
versus the white, right?
Right.
So I would see. Do you foresee this research being shown more, being researched more, or obviously it is, right?
Right.
So so just to let people know exactly what you're studying. I think that's that way we can lead into the next question.
Sure. So I study. I'm a part of many studies within the lab. I study the RGV sample and suicide among Hispanics. I study, sexual minority stressors in lesbian, gay, and bisexual young adults, and we study people of color in those groups as well. And again, in our lab, we also study the colonias, which is specifically people of color.
So let's touch on the gay and lesbians part, because
Sure.
I'm not too familiar with that part of I guess the world, right?
Right.
So maybe you can educate me on that. So there's actually differences that the people within that group have within themselves.
Right.
So touch on that, because I find that fascinating, because they're one group, right?
Right.
We put them in one group and then we expect them like they're all the same. I guess that's like everybody has the same thoughts. Like all Mexicans are the same, right? Mm-hmm. So touch on that. What has your research showed?
Sure. So like you said, we all kind of group them into one, like, oh, they're sexual minorities and that's their thing. But within a sexual minority category, each person of color can have a different experience and a different experience. And specifically, people of color versus non-Hispanic white individuals can have different experiences. So if you think about it, as a person of color, you may experience racism or backhanded racism, discrimination based on your ethnic identity. But then on top of that, you can receive discrimination for being a sexual minority. So that's kind of what we study. Specifically, what we've seen is that there are some scales that we use. Specifically, what we've seen is that people of color often experience both their ethnic discrimination and discrimination on the basis of sexual minority status, like almost double. So for example, a white lesbian, gay, or bisexual individual could still discriminate against someone that you would think is a member of their own group. So the person of color might feel not welcome in both their background, like their ethnic identity, and in their sexual orientation identity. So
I would assume that's within the LGBT or right. So I don't know how many letters are in that thing anymore.
Every day there's more added. Yeah.
Right. So even within those that little group, there's obviously tension between those people because they're so different within themselves. What do you think that stems from?
So I definitely think that stems from the need for humankind to other individuals, I suppose. So for example, if you're a white LGBT individual, you see actually within the LGBTQ plus community, there's it is kind of rampantly racist. So for example, there will be people who will say, well, I don't date Asians, I don't date Blacks, I don't date Hispanics. There's people who specifically put that label on you or specifically try to avoid you, even as a member of your own group.
Interesting.
Right.
That's fascinating. Where do you see it going? I mean, obviously, we're sectioning off America into different buckets, different areas, and we're segmenting everybody. Do you feel like there's just going to be two people in a group now and everybody just goes off on their own? Where do you see that going in the future?
I definitely see intersectionality playing a bigger role. So basically intersectionality is, again, like the intersection of identities. So for example, if you're a Hispanic male, then that's your intersectional identity. If you're an Asian woman, then that's your intersectional identity. And everybody has different intersections, even if you're white, even if you're a male, right? So I definitely see in the future more research that crosses those paths, like seeing people of color who are also lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, etc. People who are low income but are people of color or white, non-Hispanic, things like that, to make sure that we have a more colorful and wide range to study from.
So this is nationwide, the actual data that you're taking, or is it here in the Rio Grande Valley?
The LGB survey is nationwide.
Okay. And have you done any studies here specifically in the Rio Grande Valley? Have you touched on that? No?
Actually, even within the national sample, it's very hard to get these specific, because you're looking for very specific people, right? So it's really hard to obtain. And especially if you want to maintain anonymity, like to make sure that they're anonymous, it's very difficult for that. And so for that survey in particular, we use something called Amazon MTurk. So even you can sign up for Amazon MTurk. Basically what people do is they go to this website, they sign in through their Amazon account. And there's like a list of tasks that you can do. There's a list of surveys that you can do. And then for each task or survey, you get paid like 5 cents or sometimes more depending on the task. And so even through that nationwide sample with an incentive, it's very difficult to find specific people.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about suicide. So suicide just took over car crashes and statistically, right? So touch on that, of what you've seen here in the Rio Grande Valley.
Right. So my specific suicide research touches on polyvictimization and how through a mediating factor, it's called the interpersonal theory of suicide. Basically, the theory states that if you feel perceived burdensomness, so if you feel like you're a burden to others, or if you feel thwarted belongingness, like you don't belong within a group, that could mediate whether or not you have suicidal thoughts. So basically what we're thinking is, if you've been abused in childhood, or you've experienced some negative experiences within your childhood, if you've never felt like a burden to other people, or never felt like you weren't part of a group, then you won't have suicidal thoughts. But in this population, we see that a lot of people experience perceived burdensomeness and thwarted belongingness. They feel like they don't belong, and they feel like they're a burden to others, which leads to suicidal ideation among the sample. So.
Wow. Yeah, because I was scrolling through my Facebook feed the other day, and I saw a friend from high school that committed suicide.
Wow.
And a few days later, I saw a news anchor from here that committed suicide as well.
Really?
And that was on National Suicide Day.
Right.
So I see it like certain things that I feel like even talking about these things, they kind of trend, trending people. Right. I don't know if you have any input on that, but I sometimes feel like I don't even want to talk about these things, because then somebody's going to hear and say, oh, I want to be trendy or something. Right. The way people, I guess, receive information is very distorted for certain people. So I kind of like to walk a fine line of where we're educating people and telling them, how to control these things versus, talking about it and make it trendy, right? Because the last thing I would want to be responsible for is somebody's suicide just because it came out on a podcast, right? So maybe you can touch on that.
I will. I think that, and I don't have specific statistics or research to back this up, but I know as a person who lives in the Valley and who has lived in the Valley for a long time, mental health is something that a lot of people in this area dismiss. Like, oh, you have depression, oh, you have anxiety, like that doesn't count. It's not a physical illness. So
what do you think that is?
I definitely think it's a cultural phenomenon. Like you had said earlier, a lot of the times it's more like keep to yourself. You have to maintain this image that you're very strong and you're very put together, especially in this community where sometimes it can't. For example, there's a lot of poverty in this community, and if that's like your main worry for the day, you don't want to be seen as someone who thinks about themselves. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's where a lot of people can feel like they're a burden if they have a mental illness, or, that they don't belong in a group because they have these thoughts, or they've experienced some negative things in their childhood and things like that. Do
you feel that it's exploded even more with social media? Because obviously we were there before, right? But now that social media is very prevalent here, I feel a lot of people are taking pictures, their best pictures, right? They're showing everybody in the world their best case scenario, right? They're not really showing how life really is, right? So can you attribute social media to an explosion of suicides or suicidal thoughts?
I'm not very familiar in that research, but I do think that there is some sort of correlation, either negative or positive, because like you said, there is a fine line, right? So some people, and I would say most people, put their best face forward on social media. Like, oh, I went to the island and I had a great time, but you don't know what they're going through on their daily life. So I think social media can perpetuate this image of, well, everybody else's life is perfect and mine is not. Right. But I also think by exposing like you are these more vulnerable sides of this community and showing people that they aren't alone, you can really make a difference in the mental health outcomes within this community. And I definitely think mental health needs to be touched on more and needs to be exposed, and people need to be encouraged to get help.
How can a regular person do that?
So I would actually say it's kind of difficult here in the Valley. Like I myself have tried to find a therapist in the Valley, and I don't have any significant mental illnesses, but even just trying to find a therapist to talk through my problems of everyday life, it's really difficult to find here. And especially since it's low income, like I come from a low income household. I can't always afford like a $100 visit every single time, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it's really difficult, but there are mental health services, especially for students at UTRGV. There's the counseling center. I believe there's another off-campus counseling center area where they actually have therapy sessions. They have group therapy, they have, one-on-one therapy and things like that. But for people, I guess just regular adults who aren't attending UTRGV or kids or whatever, it's a little bit harder to find these services, but they're always there. It's just a little more difficult to find.
You touched on something interesting because you are looking for a therapy, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have, I'm assuming, any suicidal thoughts or tendencies,
no.
right? So why would someone like you actually go to some therapy or something like that?
So I've actually gone to therapy through the counseling program at school at UTRGV. And there's this stigma or this notion that, oh, you only go to therapy if there's something really wrong with you. Like, you only go to therapy if you have crippling depression or crippling anxiety, but you don't have to have that, Therapy, you can think of this as going to the doctor, You go to the doctor not just when you're dying. You go to the doctor, regularly for checkups or whatever, just to make sure that everything is going okay physically.
Right.
And just like you go to the doctor regularly, or you go before there's something serious going on, I think everybody should try visiting a therapist once or twice in their life. Actually, I would recommend people go regularly.
So you're using it more as a preventative type of measure,
right? And also, if you have stress on your mind, it's just like any stress, work stress, anything. For example, if you have work stress, it could bleed into other aspects of your life. And if you have emotional stress, that can bleed into other aspects of your life. It can affect your work, it can affect your school, things like that.
Gen Z. You're Gen Z, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm a millennial, apparently. So the Gen Z, I was having a conversation yesterday, and we were talking about the Gen Z generation versus the millennial, right? Where do you see the Gen Z, which obviously you're in? Are you more likely to be jumping around jobs, jumping around life? Because obviously you have traveled, right? Are you more likely inclined to do that versus stick to one thing?
I'm honestly not sure.
Or what goes through your mind when obviously you're obviously going to college, you're gonna get a job in the work, right, or industry. What's going through your head during this time? Are you already planning for the future, or are you just gonna wing it?
You see, I don't think I can say I don't think I can speak for people in my generation just as me, but I think just like millennials, there's this new wave of like, oh, we have to pursue our passion and we have to go into something that we'll actually enjoy instead of like killing myself at a 9 to 5, something like that. So I'm not really sure how my generation will differ from millennials, but I think there is like an upward expansion, I guess, of this idea that we should do things to be happy and not to do things just because other people have told us to. And partly because of social media, we've expanded on that idea. You see a lot of people saying, go for your passions. Don't just do what everyone else is telling you to do. Right. You should have your own thoughts, your own ideas. And I think the same goes for mental health. There's more people saying, there's more people being vulnerable and open about going to therapy and things like that. So I think definitely not only will this generation and future generations be more open to jumping around jobs, finding things that they actually love to pursue, but I think that they'll also be more open to things like mental health work and things like that.
Right.
So.
I feel like the mental health industry and obviously the advocacy center industries, those are super high stress jobs. And I was asking Dr. Chirac, like, how do people cope in those situations? Right. And I was even telling her myself, because sometimes I film some of the testimonies, right?
Right.
And I'm listening to these stories and I'm absorbing their energy. And I feel she was telling me a secondhand trauma, which I had no idea. I absorb people's energy. It's weird as it sounds, right? I got off subject, but I wanted to ask, because a lot of people talk about Gen Z millennials that they feel entitled. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I don't think that we're entitled per se, but we have more of a privilege. Like, for example, for me, my mom was an immigrant. I'm a first generation American. And as a first generation American, I have opportunities that she never had. She came here as an 18-year-old and she made it work. And by making it work, you find odd jobs here and there. You try to do it as much as you can. Even if you don't love it, you're making an income and you're supporting your family. And that was the mentality of my immigrant mom, which is a lot of people can identify to this here in the Valley, like the immigrant experience and doing things just because you really have to. But as a first generation American, and I think as many millennials and Gen Zers feel now, is that, they have this opportunity. They have so many opportunities now. You can do so many things. And, our parents and our ancestors or whatever gave us these chances. And because of these chances, because you have so many decisions to make and so many paths that you can take, a lot of people are often feeling like they don't know which one is the right decision, which makes us feel like we're entitled, like, oh, it's not that deep, just choose something. Right. But for us, it's like, but we want to better ourselves. And we have now this space and this opportunity to think not only about survival, but about thriving, I feel
a lot of that has happened since the internet popped out. It's obviously these opportunities were not available to our fathers and our grandfathers, right? And the internet has really shrunk the world. And now you can get like flights to Chicago and LA for like $60. Yeah. So I feel like a lot of people they're taking advantage of these things. Like for myself, like for you, my mom's not inclined to go and travel. Right. She's already maybe 58, right? Mm-hmm. So that generation is less likely to travel. But I don't know, like obviously you will travel as much as you possibly can to get that experience. Mm-hmm. So are you more of a materialistic person, or would you rather spend money on experiences?
I definitely think I'd rather spend money on experiences. And I think that is, I'm not sure about how real this really is, but this is my opinion. I think that most people our age vary in that. Like there's this huge divide of like, because a lot of people are more materialistic nowadays because of social media. They think that person has a Lamborghini, I want a Lamborghini, or I'm gonna get these AirPods just for the clout, but a lot of people now also are thinking, I want experiences. Like for me, after graduating, I plan to take a gap year, and I'm trying to travel as much as possible before entering or pursuing my PhD. And that's something that I think a lot of people think of now, like a gap year versus just jumping straight into their career. Right. And I don't think that makes them entitled. I think that just makes them, want to expand and open their mind. And
definitely, I think it's better to do it then than versus 5 years into your career.
Right.
Like, you know what, I'm tired of this. So one thing I haven't heard you talk about, and this is what I'm interested in, is our generation, millennials, are, I guess the older millennial generation is more inclined to get married, to have relationships, stuff like that. Is your generation more inclined to have relationships, to get married? Is that even on the radar, or is it career first, experience first?
that's a good question. I'm not really sure. I don't really do research in this field, but I would say personal experience wise, I think a lot of people now, like I said, since they have the opportunity to choose, and there's more of this emphasis that you should choose what you want and not what other people tell you to want. More people are doing what makes them happy, and maybe that means scaling back being married by a couple years. I don't think that means that we'll never get married or we'll never have kids. It's just that, a lot of people, they want to see the world before they commit and they settle down, or they want to excel in their career before they, put that on pause for a family, things like that.
So talking about mental health, what other techniques do you use for mental health personally?
Well, personally, a lot of people don't believe in these things. They're like, oh, that's just mumbo jumbo. That's just Los Angeles BS or whatever. But I think little things can make a big difference. So, for example, things that don't cost anything. There's apps that help you with meditation, with breathing, things like that. Within my research even, we see that basically if you have more emotional clarity and you have more of an understanding of why you're feeling what you're feeling, and you have tools to better adjust your behavior, that could really change your mental health outcomes. So that can really change if you go into alcohol use or if you go into substance use, like that makes a big difference. So even like a daily practice of mindfulness, even if it's not meditation, just being completely 100% present, even if it's only for like an hour a day or like 10 minutes a day, just being 100% present and being grateful and mindful, that can make a big difference.
It's interesting because I don't hear too many people talk like that. And I feel like I associate with a lot of people my age, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel like, is that something that's common within your age group?
I don't know if it's common. I think...
Or is it because you're educated and you think that the education, because obviously an educated Gen Zer is in a different class than obviously an uneducated, right?
Right. I don't know if it really has to do with my education, and maybe it does have to do with my education, because I have time to think about these things, right? And I can really learn how to navigate things like emotions, which most people who are just trying to survive day to day don't have the opportunity to think about. But I do think that thanks to media, more people can be exposed to this kind of thinking, like at school, I'm not taught how to be more mindful.
So how did you stumble upon it then? So
I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I mainly listen to a lot of wellness podcasts. There's a lot out there. There really is. If you just look for it. And yeah.
Which social media are you using the most?
I think I use Instagram the most. Instagram. Yeah. And
if you were to 1, 2, 3, 4, which how would you do them in order?
I think I would do Instagram, Snapchat, maybe Twitter, and then Facebook. I don't know.
Do you use LinkedIn?
I don't. I've thought about making an account because when we go to conferences and stuff, sometimes people want to look at your academic background or professional background.
So what do your conversations sound like on Instagram versus Twitter or versus Snapchat?
I think that definitely when I was in high school, I was more into Twitter, and now I'm more into Instagram. But when I was on Twitter, especially, I was part of Stan culture. I don't know if you know what that is.
No, I don't. Explain that.
So Stan culture is basically like if you really like a
a group, like a musical group, or like if you really like a celebrity or something, you stan them. Like they're your number one. And
like fandom.
Yeah, like a fandom. You're like their ride or die. So stan culture is kind of toxic, extremely toxic actually. So for example, if you like this celebrity more than this celebrity, or your favorite celebrity said something about my favorite celebrity, oh, we're enemies now.
Wow.
So there's a lot of like battling on Twitter, at least from what I've seen before, like 4 years ago. But I think on Instagram, it's more, like you said earlier, people showing their best, putting their best foot forward. And I think now, because I'm more into like mindfulness and like trying to make sure that I have a social media that reflects a more real and raw view of people in general, I think I follow a lot more like body positivity influencers, or like influencers who are more about becoming your best self instead of showing you their best self and not showing you anything else.
Right.
So I think in that, social media is becoming a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more kind, I think, but it just depends on who you follow, really.
Right, yeah, because the algorithm's just going to feed you more of what you're interested in.
Right.
So how do you feel that these big companies, so for Facebook, Google, Amazon, data has become the number one resource? It's taken over oil now. So these big industries have all this data on everybody. And how do you feel living in this world where privacy is non-existent?
I don't know. Sometimes we always joke that, you know, the computer screen, like the computer webcam or the phone webcam, there's an FBI man behind it, like looking at everything you're doing and, you know, analyzing you or whatever. And I think for me especially, it's just like, okay, my life is not that interesting. Like you can look at me, whatever, I don't care. But yeah, I think living under this in this environment where you have to be careful of what you put out there, or, you know, you never know when your data will be stolen, or, you know, whatever. There's a little bit more stress. There's a little bit more pressure. Like, oh, if I post this picture on the internet, maybe like a couple years down the line when my career is booming, my career might crash because of this.
It's interesting that you're already thinking about that.
Yeah, I think I just stress a lot about stuff. I don't think I'm like the average person, average 20-year-old, but you know, I do think that there's some added stress, but not everybody thinks about that.
Right.
So, you know.
So yesterday I was having a podcast. The guy, the director of marketing and analytics, he was actually telling me that Facebook microphone is picking up all your conversations.
Yeah, I heard.
So if you're talking about divorce, you say it a few times, you're going to see that pop up on your news feed.
Right.
How does it make you feel?
I think it's sometimes really trippy. Like, there's kind of this running joke within my friend group that, and throughout, I think most Gen Zers, that, oh my God, like they're always listening. Your phone is always listening. And, you know, sometimes you'll be talking about something, or you'll be talking about a song, and then the next ad that comes up like happens to correlate with what you just said, which is like, oh my God, are they listening? But I think also, I don't know. I think it's just part of what happens when technology advances. And if they're listening, then I guess they'll just listen to me ramble on about whatever. I mean, it's not.
Do you feel it's going to change your behavior?
I think, I don't know. I think it might, but maybe not significantly. Like if you've seen, like now that we have technology running everywhere, it doesn't mean that we're really becoming less of who we are than someone from before cell phones were a big thing, you know? Right. So I don't think it'll really change behavior that much, but I do see some benefit in
like what?
The fact that they're always listening. I think I saw an article maybe a couple months ago where there was a domestic violence thing happening, like there was just domestic violence occurring, and Alexa called 911.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's like, I guess maybe there's a lot of people, and I understand this concern, a lot of people are worried about privacy, and a lot of people are worried that there's no privacy anymore, that everyone's always listening and they're always gathering your data. And I think there might be some benefit in that. Although I'm not saying, continue to spy on us or anything.
Yeah.
But, just sometimes there's like a silver lining situation. You just got to find it.
It's a fine line where it falls again.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about the president?
Ooh, good question. I don't know. I'm not a fan, but I'm just excited that when he became president, I could not vote yet. So I didn't get my vote in. So I felt like I was kind of cheated of that opportunity. And now the elections are coming back around. I'm excited to be able to cast my vote.
That's awesome. Do you find your generation more that's going to actually go out to the polls and vote?
I think so, but
okay. Well, let me ask you this: Are you educating yourselves on the topics, everything that these new people are coming up with?
Yeah, I think so, but I think I'm also the example of like a bad citizen. Not like a bad citizen, but a lot of my friends, they really, really keep up with the current candidates. They really keep up with local politics. They're really involved in, ideals that they believe in. And for me, politics is really depressing. I really don't like politics. So I think I'm a pretty bad citizen in that I don't really keep up with that. But I think that I'm an example of like what an average person does. Nowadays, especially on campus, a lot of people are encouraging us to sign up to be voters, especially since National Voter Registration Day just passed last week. A lot of people on campus are encouraging other young people to vote. And as you saw, like in the most recent run for Senate, Beto got really close. Yeah. So I think more and more young people are thinking, hey, it's my responsibility to cast my vote. And it's my responsibility to stay educated on our candidates and stuff like that. So I think more and more people are feeling like they need to be involved if they want any change to happen. But also, not much change is happening. So,
do you follow Andrew Yang?
Not really. I just know like one specific meme about him, but yeah.
What was the meme?
the meme that he's gonna give everyone $1,000 or something like that.
Yeah, universal basic income. Are you familiar with that?
Not really.
So he's talking about giving everybody $1,000, everybody in the United States, right? So his idea is they can give all these people this, and they can explore their arts. They're gonna become more in the community, right? They're gonna they're able to go off to college now because they have this extra cash where they don't have to worry about food or stuff like that, right? So I find it super interesting because one of his main things is free college too. So UTRGV is about to have free college next year. What have you heard about that? Because I know very little about it, and maybe you can educate me on that.
I think as the student body, we also don't really hear much about it. I know I've only found out because I was trying to log into my class to do my assignment. I was trying to log into Blackboard, and in order to do that, you have to log into my UTRGV. And on their website, it said free tuition, and I was like, what? As a student body, I think for an average student, not everybody is checking what happens at the university, and so I was very surprised to see that there's free tuition. I think that's a good step. I think college is
you actually didn't know that there was free tuition until you saw it and logged in. Website, That's interesting because it was on all over social media, and it became a huge thing with like newspapers sharing it to social media.
Yeah. But again, we're always stuck in our own social media bubble, so I never got to it. I don't know. So.
That's interesting. That's an interesting take. So what do you feel that's going to change with free tuition?
With free tuition, I definitely think a lot of people will get more opportunity. Like I said, here, especially here, it's a lot of low-income families. Like myself, I come from a low-income family. If I didn't have financial aid, I would not be able to go to university. And that's just the truth. And that's the truth for a lot of people here. Yeah. So I think with free tuition, it could help a lot of people. I'm also a little wary of the statement of free tuition because when you say that, there's this expectation and you don't know where that line cuts off. And I myself am not really familiar with the situation or with how they're making free tuition happen. But I'm happy that they're giving more opportunities to people. So.
And you were talking about it's going to be more in the medical field, right?
I'm not really sure about that, but currently UTRGV, they just built the medical school. They just started the med program. They also just started, that I know of, I only know of the psychology field, but they just started a PhD program at UTRGV for psychology. So I think they're really expanding in sciences. But again, I don't know about the free tuition. I'm not really educated on that.
How do you feel your generation, obviously you're going to have these jobs, you're going to be building businesses later on. How do you feel that your generation is going to contribute back into America?
I'm not really sure. I don't think I can speak for everybody from my generation, but at least for the people that are in my bubble, in my space, I think that there's a general desire to make things more eco-friendly, for example, and to contribute back to our planet, because our planet is dying, people. But I think there is definitely more of a push to make things more diverse, to make media more diverse, to make companies more diverse, to make sure there's inclusion of people of all different races, ethnic backgrounds, sexual identity, sexual orientation, things like that. So I think there's just a more open mindset now going forward. But again, I don't really know, and I can't speak for everyone.
What do you think about Elon Musk's SpaceX? Do you think we will be an interplanetary species in your lifetime?
I'm not sure.
I might be dead by then.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Actually, on campus, I hang around with a lot of people who are into astronomy and people, that are all into that SpaceX and things like that. I don't really know about that kind of stuff, so I don't think I'm educated enough to speak about it, but I don't know. There's always a possibility.
Let's do a hypothetical situation here. So say your group goes into Mars, right? And you're inhabitants now, right?
Okay.
Your age, you're Gen Z. And do you see, right? Obviously there's problems here in the world where we are separated into groups. Yeah. Do you feel like within the first 100 or 500 years of being on Mars, is that very controlled population, do you feel like people will segment themselves as well?
Well, definitely. I don't think I'm qualified to go to Mars, and I don't think we're going to Mars anytime soon. But, in that situation, I think people will definitely be separated. And if you're into podcasts, like you're listening to a podcast right now, there's a podcast by Gimlet Media called The Habitat, and it's about this group of, they're not really astronauts, but they're training to be astronauts, I believe. They're on like a simulation Mars in Hawaii. So they're basically living in this contained bubble. It's like 6 people. They're living in this contained bubble, pretending like they're on Mars. They can't get out without their spacesuits. They have to pretend like if they go out without their spacesuits, they'll literally die, even though they're in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And even in that situation, people eventually turned against each other. Even though they came in as professionals, they came in as like people who were interested in becoming friends, and they left not speaking to each other. So.
Is that just because obviously that you're alone with yourself, or with very few people?
Again, I definitely think, like earlier we said, it's definitely sort of our nature to other people to be like, I'm part of this group and you're not part of this group. But there's always this kind of battle between groups. And I hope that changes in the future, and I hope that we all become more open-minded and, mindful about other people and other people's experiences and opinions. But definitely, especially when you're in you're saying this hypothetical situation of being in Mars, it's a very stressful situation. You can die at any time. Right. You can't breathe in Mars. You're going to die if you step out there. So I think especially under a lot of stress, people can other each other, which is kind of really sad.
Yeah, it is. Let's talk about mental health again.
Sure.
So I'm super busy. I'm an entrepreneur, and I work every minute I possibly can, because I like work, despite having been married and having children. Right, I feel like a lot. I'm making up for a lot of lost time that I just wasted. Right, so I'm always in a hurry. I'm trying to do things all the time, and I'm trying to be a pioneer in a lot of stuff that I do. But obviously I get stressed out, and I know mental health is a very important thing. So I went out and I was looking for a sensory deprivation tank. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
So I found one.
Really?
Yes.
In McAllen?
Yes, in McAllen. It's a de novo massage. So I tried it, and this last one I did was on Wednesday. I did the one the week before, and they're very different experiences. You're alone with yourself, and you're forced to lie down. And
Right.
Are you familiar with it?
Yes,
Right?
I'm familiar. Yeah.
So just for the listeners that aren't familiar with it, it's a 200 gallons of water, and then you have 800 pounds of Epsom salt, and you float for an hour and a half, and you're just in complete darkness. Soundproof, right? So there's nothing, like absolutely nothing. And I was sitting there the first day, right? And I closed my eyes, and I forced myself to stay there, just stay there, silent, quiet, not move, nothing.
Right.
And probably like 20, 30 minutes. And I don't know what meditation, I've never been in a meditative state. So I got into a meditative state, what I think is a meditative state. And I was just lying there with my eyes closed. And I suddenly saw stars, like in a far distance, like stars everywhere. And then these white clouds, right, coming in and making some shapes. I couldn't figure out what it was. But I was looking around, and I felt like my eyes were open. And as soon as I felt that my eyes were open, I suddenly realized my eyes were closed.
Right.
But it felt like you were actually looking around, like I'm looking around now, you're looking at me. But my eyes are completely shut. So I'm assuming that's a meditative state. And I know that meditation is really good for your brain. It helps you long term, right? Or mental health. So I'm taking those steps to try to, I guess, get away from the daily bombardment of life. Right? So what do you feel about that? Because I feel like for someone like me, an hour and 30 minutes is a long time to take away from life,
Right.
where I can be living at the moment. So are you, or your generation, are you more likely to do these type of things where you're just going to escape and unplug everything?
Well, like the sensory deprivation tank, basically the point of that is for you to be completely alone and isolated with yourself, right? And your own thoughts, and to try to be void of everything. That's the goal. So in essence, yeah, it's like trying to meditate. It's like a meditative state. And you don't have to go to a sensory deprivation tank in order to do that. And again, that's sort of like a mindfulness technique almost, because you're trying to not let your thoughts go rampant. You're trying to come to a sense of calm. And that can be done anywhere. That can be done like here right now. Like we can just stop and do it. And it doesn't have to be an hour. A lot of people think, well, if I meditate, like, first of all, that's like some yogi BS or whatever. And like, I don't have time for that. And I'm not going to sit in a cross-legged pose. You don't have to do that. You just sit in your chair. You can do this 10 minutes a day. I used to do it only 5 minutes a day. Like the moment I woke up, I just did that. And that was all my mindfulness work for the day. And I think mental health just comes in small steps and doing what you can. A lot of people think, in order to better my mental health or to better change my behavior that I might not think is the best behavior or coping mechanisms, I have to spend a lot of money. I have to go to therapy, and I have to, or go to a psychiatrist. Some people think that. But a lot of the times, you probably don't have a mental illness. Probably a lot of the times, usually people just need to calm down, be more mindful, do what you can. If that involves, getting professional mental health, I think that's great. But not a lot of people, especially like a 20-year-old like me, I'm super broke. Like I can't really spend money to do these kind of things, but to look for places. You're
finding a way to do it.
Yeah, you're finding a way. And, you look for resources in your area that may be free, or like UTRGV's counseling services, that's free. There's meditation apps, that's free. You can be grateful for things you have, that's free. You know, be more present, that's free.
I feel like a lot of people just don't know how to do it, and there's not enough educational or informational type of stuff. Like for me, I was listening to 3 years of motivational talk just right after that, before I actually got off my ass and did something
I'm
with
at
my
that
life.
point, yeah.
So, but it took me a long time
Yeah.
to like force myself to think a certain way, and it just stayed. And I feel like a lot of people don't really want to put in the time. And I can't sit here for 5 minutes, not here or not while I have family around that I know they're maybe even asleep.
Right.
At one moment they could wake up and something goes off, right? So being in the sensory deprivation tank with my phone off, it really allowed me to just escape. And for the first time ever, I felt like I was able to feel what meditation was somehow, some way
Right.
of what I thought it was, right? So I feel like there's a bunch of different types of things that people can do. They just need to explore what works for them.
Yeah.
Obviously.
I mean, I think even if you want to just know more about self-help or to, try to do that kind of, to try to benefit your mental health, just Google it. We have the power of the internet on our side. You can,
Power of YouTube.
yeah, you go onto YouTube, you search it up. Actually, there's not like a documentary, but there's a talk on Netflix. It's by Brene Brown, and she's, I believe, a licensed therapist, but she's also a researcher. And she does research on, I believe, like shame, like feelings of shame and things like that. So she, people like that, it's all, you can have access to it all if you have a Netflix account, which most of us do, I think. And if you have YouTube, which is free, you can Google, self-help, meditation techniques, things like that. And there's a licensed therapist on YouTube. Her name is Katie Morton. Katie Morton, KATIMORTON. She has a lot of awesome videos of, it's like educational videos about things that, you may not have, but may be interested in. And she has videos on how to, just to better yourself in general, more mental health techniques. And she also wrote a book, so if you want to read that, you can do that too. So
yeah, I find it fascinating that people learn so many different ways. I can't read. I hate reading. I will not sit through a book for longer than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Maybe page 2. But I can listen and I can learn that way. And I think when I was growing up, my parents would be like, you need to read. I don't learn that way. And I think I'm starting to see that trend with a ton of different people. My daughter, she's very visual as well. And I think my little boy is more, he's reading, he's doing these things, right? So I think it's finding that balance. And I think there's something wrong in the school systems where they want you just to focus on this, that's it. That's what you're going to learn. That's how you're going to learn. And that's it. I feel like there could be very lucrative opportunities for entrepreneurs that they figure out a way online, YouTube, whatever, Patreon, they sell these services. And, I think your generation is more susceptible to going online and learning these things. Do you think that type of education cheapens your value versus going to college, getting a degree?
I don't really know if it cheapens the value. I mean, I think if you want to be a professional, there's a saying that the master's is the new bachelor's. So basically, if you only have a bachelor's degree, which is a lot, it's 4 years of study. But even if you have a bachelor's degree, you might not be able to do anything. For most professionals now, I think there's this standard that you have to pursue higher education. But I don't think that not going to university means that you're not intelligent or that you don't have value or anything like that. Like I was in cross-cultural psychology class on Thursday, and we talked about intelligence and the different types of intelligence. And I think that's something that a lot of people neglect, like you said. In the education system, there's this big emphasis on being book smart and to make sure you have good grades and things like that. But not everybody is adept to things. Like I'm ironically really bad at math, not the Asian stereotype, but I'm really bad at math. And so I've always believed that I was not as intelligent as my peers because I still count with my fingers, and I can barely do like what a middle schooler does in math, as I'm studying for the GRE right now. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that cheapens the value of education because now a lot of people are getting education, so you kind of need to get an education in order to become a professional. But if you want to do more freelance work or you want to start a business, I don't think that necessarily requires you to go to university.
Right. Let's talk about drugs.
Okay.
Your generation.
Sure. I mean,
I want to dive into it because what do you all think about, or your thoughts on marijuana? Where the marijuana industry is going?
again, I don't think I could speak for everyone. I think I lean more liberal, so I believe, and I was born in California, so like that's the marijuana capital of the U.S. But I think that, like everything, it has, there are possibilities for negative side effects, and there are possibilities for something bad to happen. So there's this idea that, oh, marijuana is so bad, and there's drugs. It's like a drug, and it's the gateway drug to cocaine. A lot of people say things like that, and it's like, for me, I don't think that it's all that bad. For a lot of people, they use it for medical reasons. A lot of people use that because they have crippling anxiety in order to lessen the effects of anxiety, basically to get out of their own head and their own thoughts. That is what they have to do. For some people, a lot of people think that, well, if you have these problems, just take prescription medication.
And that's the thing with opiates right now.
Yeah, but that doesn't always work. And you might be in a worse situation because of prescription medication. There might be more side effects. So for some people, marijuana is beneficial for them. And I don't think that is something that other people should take away just because of their idea about it. But everybody can have their own thoughts about it. If they believe that that's a drug and that's a gateway drug, then, it's fine.
Do you feel people can be successful and be quote unquote potheads?
I don't know. I think there's a time and a place. It's kind of like you're not going to drink on the job.
Right.
That's not professional. So I think just like that, marijuana it's got to be taken with a little grain of salt.
Like alcohol. Right?
Yeah, you have to kind of, I don't think that it should just be like, oh, you can do this whenever, you can do this, all the time. But it's got to be, taken recreationally or medically or whatever, but with a designated time and place to do that, and not just
I completely agree.
Yeah.
So we're getting close to the end of the podcast, but
Sure.
I always ask this to my guests. 20 years of life experience, everything that you've gone through, you're traveling. What is the best piece of advice you can give right now to anybody?
I guess this kind of goes with the mental health side of me and the things I'm really passionate about. But I think a piece of advice that everybody needs to hear is be more kind to themselves. I think a lot of the times, especially if you're a 20-year-old, you're thinking about, if you're a 20-year-old like me, most people are thinking about, how am I going to survive? What job am I going to get? Am I going to go to grad school? Am I not? Am I going to college? Am I not? There's a lot of things going on. And on the other side of things, you're dealing with other things that don't relate to your professional career. You're thinking about like your weight, or you're thinking about like what you look like. That's a lot of things like that happen within your youth. You're thinking like, oh, I'm not as pretty as that person, or like I'm not making as much money as that person. But a lot of the times it's just to be more kind to yourself. You would be surprised how much that benefits your mental health, just to kind of go against your negative self-talk. If your brain says something negative to you, you're always your own worst critic and you're always your own worst enemy, but you're going to be with yourself for the rest of your life until the day you die, literally. So you can always change that thought. I think a lot of people don't know that they can change their negative self-talk. You can. You just have to say something positive back to counteract it. And eventually your brain will get used to it and you'll start saying positive things about yourself. So, yeah, just be more kind to yourself.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love hearing that stuff because I don't think there's enough positivity out there. And I feel everybody's bombarded by negativity, and it's negative. Mm-hmm. And so hearing you talk about that stuff from your perspective and your age group is really refreshing for an older generation like mine. I'm not even that old, but I got white hair, so I guess that counts me as old. But before we finish out the podcast, Claire, thank you very much. If somebody wants to reach out to you, maybe they're going through these type of things where you have knowledge in, or they just want to have a conversation about anything that we talked about, how can they reach you?
Sure. So if you just Google Adversities in Childhood and Trauma Lab, ACT Lab, what we're called at ETRGV, you can find me there. I have a little picture of my face, and you can click on it, and I think that gives you my contact info. And yeah, that's basically how you can reach me if you want to know more about my research and what we're doing here in the Rio Grande Valley.
Awesome, Claire. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Joshua Morales Podcast.